My name is Marion Cunningham, and I am the Associate Director for Administration for the Morningside Academy for Design. Hasn't this morning been just awesome? I mean, just the diversity of presentations, it's been excellent. I mean, just amazing. And our audience is a big part of that, so I want to also extend my appreciation to you as well. I also want to take a moment to thank the team. As you can imagine, it takes a lot of people to pull things together and to make them successful. My colleagues are just outstanding, and I've been amazed at some of the things that they have been able to pull off. So this is my opportunity to say thank you to them. In addition, I want to thank our website developer and the developer of our graphic identity. You've seen some of their work on the screen here. They are omnivore, and their principals are here with us today. They are Alice Chung, you can stand up, Karen Sue, and Julie Cho. They are outstanding and outstandingly talented, so thank you. I also want to thank my colleague, Roy Salguero Barrio. He is the architect and curator of The Power of Design, and it's his vision and research and outreach and curation that has made this such a wonderful event and so many diverse and interesting voices. So I want to say thank you to Roy as well. This past Sunday, I read an interview of John Durant, the director of the MIT Museum. And in the interview, he kind of gave a nod to design. He talked about the importance of having a space that invites people to interact, that encourages them to be engaged, and also that essentially transforms their learning experience. As you walk around and explore the MIT Museum, I hope you'll think about what it takes to have a transformative learning experience. As you listen to our speakers today, I hope you'll keep that in mind. And as you also reflect on your own experience as a learner, think about what were some of those transformative moments. Our second session will be moderated by Skylar Tibbits. He is the Associate Professor of Architecture, Director of the Self-Assembly Lab, and also the Faculty Director of the Undergraduate Major and the Undergraduate Minor. Skylar.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm Skylar Tibbits. I'm faculty in the Department of Architecture, and I direct our undergraduate programs, Architecture Major, Minor, and Design, as you just heard. When we created the design program, the vision was to take all of the amazing programs, disciplines, degrees across campus, whether that's physics, computer science, biology, math, engineering, et cetera, and pair that with a design degree. And we were specifically interested in making design as broad and as inclusive as possible because there are lots of design programs, design classes, there's lots of designers across campus. So we weren't specifically talking about one form of design, but many forms of design and many hybrid takes on design. We also were not interested in creating a design silo of product design or graphic design or architecture design or fashion design, although it is all of those, but it also sort of none of those. It's about creating polymath designers, that we want to allow these students to create their own new hybrid forms of design and cross many disciplines. So we can have biology designers, computational designers, physicist designers, et cetera. And so in that way, it's about combining the technical with the creative, the left brain, the right brain, the mind, and the hand. And when we created this, it quickly became the third most popular minor across campus, right next to computer science and math, or energy studies, and environment and sustainability, which is really the perfect place for design. And in 2016, then our numbers have continued to grow after creating this program. And I think this is showing the demand for design across campus, that our students are more and more interested and engaged in design. But that also mirrors what we're seeing around the world and globally. We're seeing more design programs than we've ever seen before. We're seeing an interest and a demand for design across business, across culture. If you do a quick search of the word design, historically, it's really interesting and perhaps different. Look at the top 5 countries for the search term design. Pakistan, Philippines, Nepal, Sri Lanka, and India is different than we might expect. And if you look at the topics that emerge, design thinking or circuit design, UX design. And you've heard a lot this morning, in this morning's session, about grand challenges. And if we're really interested in tackling some of these global challenges that we're facing, whether that's energy, climate, food, water, I think we need to educate our students in a different way. We need to really reimagine how we combine the technical and the creative, and I think design sits at the heart of that. So today we have an amazing session. We're going to be talking about design education, design learning, how we can have impact around the world through design teaching and doing. And we have the following joining our session today. Saeed Arida, co-founder and chief executive excitement officer of NuVu. Sara Hendren, associate professor of arts and humanities at Olin College of Engineering. Amy Smith, senior lecturer and founding director of D-Lab. Maria Nicanor, director, Cooper Hewitt, Smithsonian Design Museum. And Cynthia Breazeal, professor of media arts and sciences, the Media Lab, MIT Dean for Digital Learning, and director of MIT's RAISE initiative. And we'll start it off with Saeed. Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, John, for the invite. Thank you, everyone, for being here. It's amazing to kind of hear the first session about all these interdisciplinary projects and the people who are leading them. And as we start talking about education, the obsession that we have always, how do we train students to be able to do that kind of work? So during this presentation, I will be talking about NuVu. It's an organization that I started with a few friends 12 years ago at the end of my PhD years here at MIT in the architecture school. And we're going to talk about some of the impact that it's been having on students, teachers, and schools throughout the years it's been in existence. So in 2010, we started an experimental small school here in Central Square, and it's still there. And we have around 60 students, and it's completely based on the studio model. So the challenge at the time, how do we take a regular high school and turn it upside down and turn it into a studio school? And so we've done that for around 5-6 years. We've seen a lot of success with our students. We saw the impact that it's having on transforming the lives of these students. And so after 6 years, we decided to start NuVu-X, and it's an organization that works with a lot of schools all over the world to take some of the learnings that we had from the school and take them into schools elsewhere. So a lot of us, I think, in this panel will be talking about design education. For us, when we started thinking about the school, the studios basically made up the core of what we are trying to do in the school. So there are no courses. The whole thing is based on studios. The students enroll in these studios, and for every 3 to 4 weeks, they get a different problem, and they have to solve it in that span of time. And the idea was that the students will do this many times over a span of 4 years. And ultimately, we want to teach the students this design process. How do you take a studio brief, and how do you come up with something amazing at the end of it? And throughout this process, they have to learn how to research, how to document, how to brainstorm, and how to take the feedback and the critique that the instructors are giving them and turn them into something amazing. I think I'm just going to pay attention a little bit here to the critique piece, because that's when a lot of our students come to us. That is really the piece that they really struggle with the most. In a traditional school, you are given a homework, and then the students just respond to it. You get some feedback, and that's it. In a studio environment, this happens 100 times. And if you are not used to it, when I taught first-year students here in architecture school too, there's a lot of crying that happens. And so we try to obviously be very transparent about the students about why we are doing it, but we are very intentional about really going through this many times so the students get used to this. And I think ultimately what we get is these resilient, creative kids who are able to come up with a solution no matter how complex the problem is. And since we cannot be at the school, and I should have asked John if I can have some kids with me, because that's ultimately how you can see really the power of the school that we have. So I'm just going to share a quick video, just hopefully captures a little bit of the energy that we have at the school. So when we talk about the design studio, I think I want to highlight three kind of things. The impact that it's been having on our students, the impact that it has on the teachers that we work with, and its impact on the schools also that we work with. And probably someone here knows another pedagogy that is more powerful than the studio environment, but I have not seen anything that works really better. It's the most engaging form of education that we've seen. When you see students in architecture school, they stay day and night working on their ideas because ultimately they feel empowered by the ideas that they have. And this is what we see with our students also. When they come from a traditional place to a school like NuVu, suddenly their ideas actually matter. And so rather than just receiving all the stuff from the teachers and they have to respond to it once, they are really engaged in a problem-solving process with the teachers that they have. And so this is one story of our students who graduated 2 years ago. His name is Pierre. A lot of our students who come to NuVu, they come for two reasons. Either they were not challenged enough in the traditional school, or the second one, they did not thrive in the traditional school because it has usually a set criteria of what it means to be successful. So Pierre had to deal with a lot of dyslexia throughout his schooling years. And everywhere he went, he was always defined by that. So you have to be in a different group than the other kids. You have to have different accommodations because of that. One time, 3 years ago, he came to our summer program. And he quickly realized that he should not just be defined by that. He has a lot of ideas. He's very creative. And he can do a lot of really amazing projects. And there was almost a switch that happened, and he started really producing some amazing work. This is a collaboration that he did with a lot of our students over the years. This was a project in collaboration with the city of Cambridge to design a structure in Dennehy Universal Park. This site used to be a landfill, and it was converted in 1990 to a park, but then there was a push to kind of reimagine that from a universal design perspective. And the students went through a process of almost a year and a half to produce this amazing structure. And you can see my daughter in the right. She does not seem very impressed, but she actually loved it when we were there. So almost every other weekend, we actually go there and we play with it. It's pretty amazing. And this actually project illustrates exactly like how Pierre kind of thinks. Because of his dyslexia, when the pandemic happened, and that was exactly during his thesis semester, everybody had to go remote, and he really struggled with that mode of communication. He's just used to this being in the studio space. You can express yourself in multiple ways. You can just make a sketch. You can grab an instructor. You can make something very quickly, and you show it to people. But the Zoom basically made it very specific about how you're going to communicate with your friends and with the coaches. So he ended up designing these add-ons to Zoom that were actually quite amazing. So everyone on Zoom struggles, like, how do I mute the camera? How do I mute the mic? Or how do I hide myself? Or how do I switch rooms and all of that? So he designed all of these different accessories that would allow him to open the camera. And once that happens, then people can see you. Then you can shut it if you don't want people to see you. The best one here is how to switch rooms. We have a lot of kids, and every time we tell them to go to rooms, so you can see the one with the slide that goes into these different rooms. And so that made it a lot easier for him to kind of communicate with everybody throughout the Zoom. When we started our NuVu X network around 5 years ago, the impact for us shifted a little bit from the students into the teachers, because at some point we realized that if we're going to have the impact that we want to have, we really need to kind of turn a lot of the teachers that we have in this country into to thinking like designers. And so Ryan is one of the first teachers that we started working with at All Saints Academy. He was also the associate head of the school. And you can see from his quote, I think this is, like, we see similar experiences with a lot of the teachers who are used to going into the classroom. You sit in the front and you give a lecture, and sometimes you ask the students to do something in response to that or not, into basically a teacher who facilitates these experiences. So you start designing these experiences. And it's empowering to the students, but it's also empowering to the teachers that rather than just taking this set curriculum and I teach it every year for 20 years, I'm designing these new experiences every year. And I'm designing them in response to a lot of things that happen in this world. So they can see also the level of engagement that the students are having. And we had a major kind of shift in the way we actually started thinking about making teachers think like designers. When we started this work with other schools, we thought that the only way to do it was to actually send designers inside the schools. And we had a cohort of fellows who would go to different schools all over the world, and they will seed kind of these experiences inside schools. And we had a lot of great success with it. We had some issues also around sending someone into a school that they would not know much about and all of that. But I think overall, it was really amazing to kind of see how these design experiences can be created within existing schools. But recently, what we started realizing is that we need to start working directly with the teachers. We need to find active ways of how we can turn these teachers into basically to be thinking like designers. And so we started designing a lot of tools that would allow us to kind of do that with the teachers, from a studio online management system to designing the curriculum pieces that we call them studios, into doing a lot of the training. And we are actually almost finding a lot more success doing that than actually us taking our kind of designers into the schools and doing it. So it's been really great to see the impact multiplying, because every teachers that we work with, they will be interfacing with 100 students in 1 year and then another 100 students in the other year. Another exciting part of this work is actually rethinking how schools can be from the ground up. So we started working with this school, Odyssey, in California. And we started working with them from the beginning, as opposed to kind of having us come from later on to transform the school. And we came up with this idea of the single project in the middle, and then the science studio, the humanities studios, and the NuVu studio will be all kind of collaborating on the same studio, and then each one will take that project and they will basically teach it from their own perspective. And so it's amazing to start seeing how the studio environment can really be used as a way to restructure schools. This is another iteration of that model, and it's also in California, called Bastonia Global High School. And the idea here is that there is no need to have that central kind of single project. We can have these multiple design labs, and all of these labs are designed and with different subject area teachers. So it's kind of amazing to start seeing how the design studio model can be applied in these different schools. This is another organization that we started working with around 6 years ago. It's called Karam Foundation. It was also started by an alumni of the school too. And she was telling me about the work that she was doing with refugees in Turkey, and I was telling her about the work that we are doing here, and we immediately clicked that we should be taking this model into the Syrian refugees across the border. And at some point, we started doing these virtual exchanges between the two places, and that really proved to be amazingly powerful, because suddenly you can see this studio that works on a global scale and trying to address some of the more kind of intense problems all over. So just a minute, just to
We
show
do
you
many
some of the
things with
kids.
NuVu Studio, but one of the really amazing things that we do are exchange studios, virtual exchange, and we've been doing that for about a year and a half now. And it's really interesting to see how we have groups of kids here and groups of American kids either at NuVu Studio or at a NuVu partner school exchange and work together on a design studio. So one of the first ones that we did was a prosthetic studio. And we had groups of 4 kids, 2 American kids, 2 Syrian kids that worked together to actually design a prosthetic for a real-life case here in Reyhanli. The different things that people think of, that there's like this wall between kids from different parts of the world and their experiences actually becomes something that is overcome, and they're able to collaborate and work together and create something together that's really powerful.
I mean, for you who worked with kids, you would agree with me that working with kids is quite amazing. It's quite different from older people. They have this naiveness, this freshness, this unbound kind of creativity, and I think for the last 12 years, we've been obsessing with how to create environments that would allow these kids to thrive. And so I think we owe it to them to kind of match their creativity by creating these new structures that would allow them to be the innovators of the future that we want them to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Saeed. Amazing to see all the progress of NuVu over the past few years and how it's translating globally, et cetera. Next up, we have Sara Hendren, Associate Professor of Arts, Humanities, and Design at Olin College of Engineering.
Thank you. I think I'll use this mic. Is that working? Great to be here today. So I'm here today, from Olin College, which is also an engineering school, but a tiny one, an experimental lab school down the road in Needham. So I'll talk today about this trio that often gets spoken about quite loosely together, art, design, and engineering. And we often think of design in the middle, as it is here, somewhere hand-wavy, vaguely between expressive artifacts on the art side and raw utility on the engineering side. But I think there's much, much more going on in the places where these things meet. And I want to make a case for weaving them together much more tightly. So let's drop in then at Olin with this woman named Alice Shepard. Alice is a wheelchair dancer and approached me because she wanted a ramp some years ago, an inclined plane, a miracle of physics, simple machine, but not a ramp for getting into a building, she said. She wanted a ramp for stage. So you see her here engaging with students in a mechanics class. They're thinking together about the locomotion of ramps, about the balletic wonder of wheeled mobility, and about the very real access barriers that have historically hindered many wheelchair users. So just let you ponder that acceleration and resistance in pursuit of grace and poetics. We put together this provisional dance space as a prototyping studio. This is Alice, and a set of dance tiles, and then a rough assembly of different size and scale ramps. And that prototyping space gave birth to this enormous ramp that I'm showing here, an oceanic wave structure of wood about 24 feet square and all messily assembled in this quite buttoned up administrative building. We do have shops, but not this big. Not everyone was thrilled that this was, like right off camera is like a tiny little coffee table with a little bowl of mints, you know, and then there's these drills and sawdust. So here a student is standing behind the big final ramp design as it's half made, that's showing its understructure in wood, and then there's this aerial shot from above with students and that big ramp as it's nearly finished. But again, this beautiful one-off architectural artifact was designed in a class on mechanics. Mechanics and dance and beauty and politics. A ramp for using the physics of acceleration and resistance for surprise and drama. This is a shot of that finished ramp that Alice performs on today, backlit here by a night sky of stars, and making way for Alice to perform as she does, stretching her arms here overhead with cane supports as extensions. It's this mix of concerns that I've been interested in for the last decade or so at Olin. How to transform familiar mechanics, the same calculations and fabrication processes that we would use in engineering, how to use those same affordances for this enigmatic poetics, or perhaps a social kind of physics. But the moments I'm most interested in are these prototyping moments. I'm betting on something unfolding in real time in this convivial space of making art. The ideas and also the relationships. I'm trusting, in other words, that in being caught up in this singular project, designing a ramp for expressive ends, the goal of art, I am trusting that my students believe me, that there's a direct line between Alice's ramp, shown here on the left, and this humble curb cut on the right, like at every street corner in the vicinity of where we are today. Because hidden in this curb cut, a practical design, a bit of infrastructure built of the incline plane, literally just the alteration of force across a surface. This is an object that has concretely edited the built environment at infrastructural scale. When my students are lost in these moments with Alice, making things together, I can more easily, in that moment, tell them about Ed Roberts, this man, a polio survivor and one of our great civil rights leaders. In this black and white photo, he's on a stage in a chair speaking to audiences, as he did for so many years, about disability rights. Roberts was the first significantly disabled student to attend UC Berkeley in the 1960s. And he lived on campus here at this hospital, it's no longer there, Cowell Hospital, in a clever adaptive reuse of a hospital room that became, for him, a dorm room and then a whole hall of rooms that other students with disabilities used, the ones who followed him, historic enrollments by these students. So a hospital ward became a dorm hall, and that switch became an idea that changed the world, honestly. Because once those students were away from home, living on campus, knowing that they could make it with adaptive gear and flexible redesign, suddenly their whole self-paradigm had to change. They had to see themselves as the protagonists of their own lives, and they had to insist on being seen as such. The student group at Berkeley got energized. They called themselves the Rolling Quads, but they also made alliances with students who had different kinds of disabilities, like Roberts, pictured here with a fellow student who was blind. And this campus effort was a significant node in a bigger civil rights push of disabled people across the United States in that era. Here you see a protest in the early 1970s at the US Capitol building. It's a much longer story, of course, but those efforts are what eventually got us, among other things, the simple and profound physics of the inclined plane everywhere in the built environment. It's hard to remember for many of us, that there was a time not long ago when this image on the left was the norm, wheelchair users needing a massive assist to navigate up and down the inherited stepped curbs of the world, the way things are, and the sheer inertia of that being, and the miracle of access that was made possible in this creative adaptation of curb cuts. And if you go back to Berkeley today, you can visit the Ed Roberts campus, which commemorates him in this big, joyous red ramp front and center in its lobby in a tribute to the editing of the built environment. So let's just return then to this classroom. You might hear this whole story and see Alice and students here and think like, oh yeah, I know what's going on here. I got it. This is what you mean, right? STEAM. That's what you mean, Sarah. STEM, with a little admixture of arts mixed in, just for good measure and well-roundedness, make everything a little more colorful and happy. And I'm not knocking it, but it's an unsatisfying catch-all term for the many, many things that I think are happening between these two images, between Alice's ramp and the curb cut. What can happen between these things is a change in narrative with big consequences. What do narratives do? They shift paradigms, they oxygenate imagination, they recover histories which go to sleep so fast. They create my favorite kind of uncertainty, the productive kind. So often students of disability as it meets design can only see this narrative playing out. The futuristic replacement parts, the promise of the post-human swooping in, as in this image of a sophisticated arm and hand prosthesis. But Alice and her collaborator, Laurel Lawson, both shown here on that ramp at Olin, the presence of these people, their gear, and their art making, they force the elements of the story of design and disability to utterly change. No longer can they see the technology at the center, you see. Instead, what's here is the radically adaptive human sensorium at work with tools and technologies, but not in the way students expect, to say the least. We love in design to ask this question. I love it. I'll do it next spring in a human-centered design course at Olin. How might we? That's the question we ask. It's a good question, one with lots of energy around it, for getting our hands dirty, for making things in the studio. But the artful gesture, the enigmatic object, and also these recovered histories in our design studio, they help us ask a deeper question, which is, who are we? What does disability tell us about dependence and interdependence, about our bodies and their many tenuous relationships to the built environment, about the constraints that might also bring pleasure and prowess in addition to their difficulties? Who are we is a philosophical question. We take it up regularly in the arts and humanities. And if we're looking for it, we can see it too in design. Thank you.
Yeah, that was amazing. It's so powerful how you're connecting the human story and history and narratives with design and engineering. Next, we have Amy Smith, Senior Lecturer and Founding Director of D-Lab.
Great, thank you, Skylar. And thank you to John and Maria and the Chan family for actually making the Morningside Academy for Design a reality here at MIT. I'm super excited for where it's going to go. So I work at MIT D-Lab, which works to develop, design, and disseminate collaborative approaches and practical solutions to address challenges of global poverty. And I think design is a critical part of this. I believe very strongly in the power of design. So I was delighted to be a part of this panel. I think it was Nelson Mandela said that education is the greatest weapon to change the world. And I would add, and I think many people in this room would agree, that design is also an extremely important tool for changing the world. Design transforms learning. Right? It changes the way that students think about their education. It gives them a chance to apply the theory to practice. It brings together mens et manus, which is such an important part here at MIT. And I think that it also brings together different disciplines. So there's a lot that design does to transform learning. But I think perhaps more importantly, design transforms the learners. And that's one of the things that I want to focus on here. So how many people here have designed something or made something and built something? I'm expecting to see a lot of hands, indeed, yes. And how do you feel after you design something and actually it works? It's out there in the world. Awesome. Awesome and awesome, anything, other thing. Anyway, I often ask this question, and people feel happy, they feel joy, they feel pride. And there's a lot of important things that come out of the experience of designing that transforms the way that you think about yourself and about what you can do in the world. So if we want to take a sort of a brief philosophical interlude, we can look at the way that Maslow characterized the needs that need to be met for us to live sort of fulfilled lives as human beings. Right? You have the basic needs that need to be met: water, food, shelter, safety, etc. And then you have your psychological needs about belonging and relationship, and then your sort of your self-actualization and fulfillment needs. And if we look at this through a design lens, the basic needs are met by using technology. So a water filter provides safe water for drinking. A grain mill provides flour that can be used in cooking. A shelter provides a safe environment in which we can live. However, the sort of the higher level needs, I believe, are met by creating technology. We almost always design in teams, and we build relationships that way. It allows us to express our creativity. How many of us, after finally putting together that IKEA shelf, say, wow, I can do anything now. I can change the world, right? So design has that power. And I think it's an incredibly important thing to think about these intangible benefits of design that satisfy these higher levels of our needs, as well as sort of the basic functionality of the designs that come out of things. And design is a critical way of how DLab approaches development, international development. We believe it can and does play an important role, both in creating the technologies that can improve lives and livelihoods in communities, but also in transforming the way that communities address challenges that they face. Right? A lot of development is typically done in a very much charitable way, in which solutions are given out to communities to problems that were identified outside of the community. And so design allows community members to identify the challenges and create the solutions on their own. So at DLab, we characterize design in these three different paradigms. So one is design for the users, in which the designers interact with the users to understand the context, to gain empathy, to understand the culture in order to create a design that can be useful for them. The next is co-creation or co-design, in which the users and designers are part of the same team and they work together and they design with each other to create a solution. And then the third paradigm is designed by the users, in which the end users, and in our case, these are the people who are living in resource-poor settings around the world, are trained in design so that they feel confident in creating solutions for themselves. So I wanted to show a few examples from DLab's work that exemplify some of these different paradigms. So design for is something largely that happens in our classes. So DLab offers about 15 different classes per year here at MIT. And during this time, students engage with community partners to understand and identify challenges, to appreciate the context. Frequently, they travel to visit the community partners to really engage and understand, and then create technologies in the lab. So this is an example of some students building a more efficient stove for Latin America. And here we have an example of what's called a multi-crop thresher that allows you to remove the grains from a wide variety of crops. And I think the words that Elliot puts here sort of shows the transformation that design was responsible for in his approach to MIT. You know, when he arrived at MIT, he was interested in science for science sake, but now he feels like the problems have much more meaning. And it's a constant motivator for him to take on new challenges. So design inspired him, and it gave him the confidence to look at challenges as not something to sort of sympathize with, but something to take on. Another thing that we do at D-Lab is we run design summits, co-design summits. And we've done dozens of these around the world in which we bring together local community members, designers, students, workers from NGOs, government workers. We have farmers, we have physicists working together in co-creative teams to create solutions. And the premise of these summits is that innovation thrives at the intersections of disciplines. So bringing together students and these diverse array of players has another really important transformation, both on the student and the other members of the group. So this student commented that the co-creation workshop really forced her to think more creatively and to be more proactive in seeking solutions to the challenges. Right? And then also understanding those challenges more deeply. Furthermore, it shattered her perceptions of that she had about refugees, who are often cast as needy and vulnerable, but she saw them as confident, creative problem solvers. Right? And then it also changed her way of thinking about how collaboration happens in collaborative design. On the side of the refugees who were part of this, one of the refugees spoke at the closing of the design summit that he'd been a refugee for 12 years and he had never even stepped into an NGO office. But here he was able to present his ideas to the head of the organization who's now taking up the challenge. So it really changed the part of the community members to feel confident in voicing their solutions and their ideas for challenges, not being sort of passive recipients of technologies. And then the third paradigm, design by, this is something that we have been doing extensively since 2009 through a program that we call Creative Capacity Building, in which we've adapted the design curriculum that we use here at MIT for community members where there's limited literacy, limited education, and converting it to a highly accessible hands-on design curriculum. Most recently, we've applied this in South Sudan in areas of conflict, looking to see how could design not only be used to improve lives and livelihoods, but how can it be used to improve social cohesion, to reduce tensions between parties that are in conflict with each other. And we recently wrapped up the first phase of this project, and there were some remarkable quotes that came out of that as well that I think speak to the transformation of design. Okay. So one young woman commented that she felt happy and proud of herself for having developed a wheel cart. Some of her friends asked her where she got it from, and I told them that my team and I developed it, and they were shocked and proud of the great work. So this really not only changed the way that she thought of herself, but of how people in her community thought of her. And in South Sudan, women are not really thought of as artisans, builders, and technologists. So this was a really powerful shift. Mm-hmm. Another participant said, I felt proud when I made the technology, and since I made that technology, I have not slept hungry for days now. Right? So these technologies have direct impacts on challenges that face people on a daily basis. And in terms of building social cohesion, one participant said, in fact, I made a lot of friends from here where we have sat and eaten together. we had decided, we tried to make these designs a neutral space where people could come together and work together. Some of them, I used to see them as enemies, but now we are tight friends, and it is the CCB that did that. So building connections between people as they work together on collaborative products that can benefit both of them. And then finally, one participant said, I was expecting the training to change me from bad to good. Like I said before, I was a raider, but now I am a scientist with technologies that have not been there before. So this has fundamentally changed the way that this person feels like about themselves and the part that they're playing in the conflict which continues in South Sudan. And so we're seeing that design has deep and meaningful impacts on students by inspiring and motivating them and having them think about what they can do to change the world. On community partners in the way that they think about how their challenges can be met and what their role is in shaping their future. And in conflict situations, in providing a mechanism to bring people together to start to build the social cohesion which is going to ease tensions and hopefully reduce the conflict in the long run. So finally, I'll just say that I believe the power of design is both tangible and intangible. And it's both the products and the process of design that achieve these benefits. And that all of these benefits help to transform individuals and institutions, societies, and systems. And the power of design is an incredibly important thing. And once again, I'm so pleased that we now have an Academy for Design to help engage our students and our partners around the world in the power of design to change lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy, for that. I love how you're changing the conversation from design being a problem solver technique or design as a new way to teach, but it's about design for fulfillment and design for the human. I think that's really powerful. Next, we have Maria Nicanor, Director, Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum.
Thank you, Skylar, and thank you very much to John and to Maria for getting us all together today, and for doing so at a museum, I might say, which I think signals to the great intentions of what the Academy might be doing in the future. So I am the relatively newly appointed director of the Cooper Hewitt Design Museum. We are the national museum dedicated to architecture and design, and I'm here today to talk to you about the role of museums and cultural organizations in general in how we can be a part of this conversation about how we learn about design. Now, I'm not a designer myself, like many of my colleagues who you've heard from so far. I'm an architectural historian and a design historian, and I come from a pretty traditional training, in art historical training in that sense. But I use the platform of museums, what you see here. I think we just lost, can you hear me? Yes. But I use the platform of museums as my preferred medium of choice to tell a story. So you're looking at an image of the Prado Museum. I'm from Spain. That's Mr. Velázquez there sitting right there at one of the main entrances. And what these sort of like powerful, heavy baggaged institutions can do in this conversation is something that I'm really interested in. Now, I've never had the pleasure to work at the Prado Museum, but I did work for many years at this other one, at the Guggenheim Museum in New York, where I was one of their architecture curators, and I worked on many shows that looked exactly like the one that you're seeing on the screen. I was one of the team members that curated the Frank Lloyd Wright retrospective in 2009 that celebrated the 50th anniversary of the Guggenheim Museum on Fifth Avenue. And it was a very traditional show in terms of how one explained and educated audiences about design and about architecture with a very traditional, clean, white, almost clinical display of architectural drawings and models, renderings, and the kinds of materials that you see in a design or architecture show at the museum. Now, after working many years in displays like this and in exhibitions like this, which I do love as a historian, I will add, I became increasingly interested, perhaps less so in images like the one that you're seeing here, and more in this kinds of situations as connected to museums and to museological practice. So in a few years after the Frank Lloyd Wright exhibition, we had the opportunity to take the architecture and design program of the museum outside of the museum walls, outside of the Guggenheim building on Fifth Avenue, to take it directly onto the streets, onto derelict sites like the one that you're seeing here on screen, which was in New York City's Lower East Side, where we were granted the opportunity to work on a project that I don't have the time to get into the details, but that was called the BMW Guggenheim Lab, a very complex, complicated project in a variety of ways. But what the lab did was we commissioned a group of architects and designers to design a pavilion, a building, which was to turn into an excuse to have conversations about the future of cities and the future of design. So by working with Atelier Baowa from Japan and with Sulki and Ming, designers from Korea, we turned this site into a site of possibility and conversation, as you can see here with the building of the actual lab. We took this pavilion to 3 cities around the world. We started in New York, we then took it to Berlin, and we ended the adventure in Mumbai. And we heavily programmed it in a variety of ways to have conversations about the future of cities. Now, the key here was the variety of formats that we used to teach our audiences about architecture, about design, and about urbanism. There were no exhibitions on view at the lab. We practically had no walls, but we did experiment with different kinds of formats and different kinds of storytelling, which are the 2 main ideas that I mainly want to communicate and get across with today. We acknowledge that different people learn in different ways. So while some of us might get a lot out of a symposium in a very academic format, some others might learn much more from attending a party, by having fun in a workshop, or by going to a film screening. So these were the different kinds of formats that the lab was experimenting with, by playing games and just by making the experience very much like one that did not look or feel like the museum. So eventually, we were able to turn the sort of passive contemplation that happens in a situation like this in the rotunda to a very active sort of act of creation in the space, just by creating the adequate environment and the adequate space for those conversations to flourish. I want to show you next another project that I worked on. This is a video that I hope we can watch with a very low volume. This is a project that I worked on at the Victoria and Albert Bridge Museum in London. It's from 2014. At the time, let me see if I can play it. At the time, the museum had decided to dedicate a whole year to the topic of engineering. And this was done to demystify the idea that engineering and math was a complicated subject that we could not make in a museum. It was a very concerted effort on the part of the institution to do something about reading engineering in the space of the museum. So what I'm showing you is one of the installations that we did at the garden of the Victoria and Albert Museum. Even though I know we have a robot upstairs that I saw when we did this in 2014, it was radically different than what we had seen. More of the general audience had access to seeing or even experiencing these kinds of processes. So that gave us the opportunity to do a variety of other things, which I'm not showing you here, but which also were part of the entire season. It was a historic exhibition where we were both Arab and put together a symposium mimicry, and we explored a variety of other ways of learning that just made the topic so much more accessible than it would have otherwise been. So we had programs like this one as well that just brought new audiences in contact with engineering and what it meant. So again, just a new way of entering a topic that might be different. And I'm showing you very much on purpose, not the images of the symposium on biomimicry, but these kids dancing under the robot, because that exposed new audiences to that topic in ways that we made design as a feasible sort of even career in the future by just exposing them to those materials. I'd like to tell you next about the work of the Rice Design Alliance. This is an organization that exists within the Rice School of Architecture. And when I was there working in Houston at the Alliance, I was challenged by Sarah Whiting, then the Dean of Rice Architecture, to bring the content of the architecture school outside of the walls of the architecture school into the Houston community. So how do we translate the academic work that was happening at the school into the design, for the design interested, and for those who were interested in being a part of the conversation but didn't feel necessarily very comfortable to join it in that way. So I think that having organizations like this that are the public programs and outreach arms of academia is a very, very important move and a very, very important statement, so that we can connect academia with real life and sort of like this, you know, old discourse of the beyond the hedges, but that very much is a translation effort when you're doing it on the ground. So I'm going to run you very quickly through the kinds of programs that we did at the Alliance, just to again show you the ability to tell stories about design through different formats. We ran a publication, an annual publication, Site Magazine, which you can see the last issues of. Here we tackled mass timber. The second number that you see there was dedicated to design in the pandemic, and Site 100, which was devoted to the aftermath of Hurricane Harvey in Houston. We run traveling programs, so we would take people to where design was, both nationally and internationally. We did tours in the city, and this one, ADAPT in particular, was interesting in that it provided the opportunity to talk about residential homes, but also how residential design intersects with climate change and the elevation of homes that is needed in places like Houston. We talked about historic preservation and how homes needed to be redesigned, or how homes could be powered in new ways to be more adaptive and resilient. Every year we did a civic forum, and that brought together partners, faculty, and the members of the school with the outside community of the city as well. So we would bring in civic leaders to talk about the most urgent issues for Houstonians. We would actively go out and ask people what were some of their design concerns that they wanted to talk about. So what you're seeing is a collection of the civic forums that we did over the years. What's the Plan, for instance, tackled the aftermath of Harvey and flooding in Houston as well. Obsolescence talked about historic preservation in a city that loves to demolish their buildings. So we had an opportunity to talk about that. A House of One's Own was tackling the housing crisis. Power in 2021 was a direct response to the blackout that happened in Texas in February of 2021. So we very quickly shifted our programming and decided that we needed to bring government leaders, industry leaders, the power companies in Texas to discuss what had happened in a deeper level. And then food equity was addressing issues of urban food deserts in Houston as well. So again, an example of like how bringing academics, civic leaders, policymakers together around the table was a successful way of just learning in different ways about the power of design. And I'm going to end here, which is really the beginning, really, of what I'd like to communicate today, but with the Cooper Hewitt, where I am now, with a reminder of how incredibly lucky we are to have a national public, underlining public, or a museum that is dedicated to architecture and to design. I really loved how many of you here have either brought up your work at the Cooper Hewitt, have you shown there. Some of us have been co-authors and books, and you've worked on exhibitions at the museum as well. So I think that just shows the incredible power that having a platform for this can have in our country. Other countries don't have this luxury. In Spain right now, where I'm from, they're having a conversation about the need for a National Museum of Architecture and Design in 2022, but we've had one since the 1800s, thanks to the audacity of two sisters that created what they themselves called a learning lab, right? We all thought that we had invented the labs. Well, we haven't. They did it first, and I think that that's such a great DNA to inherit as an organization. But this is a platform that I believe really should be central to how we learn and how we bring general audiences in contact with design, and that we must use, because many of you demonstrated today that more design-educated citizens make for better collaborators in the design process. And I think that's an important part of what we can do from a platform like the museum, which has a mandate to educate and to inspire and empower people through design. So I think particularly in the complex times that we live in, where systems of work and institutional collaboration are even coming into question and needing to be radically rethought, I would like to end today with a sincere invitation to all of you to use this platform and to use the national platform that we have from an institution like the Smithsonian, so that we can help really turn the conversation about design radically in a provocative way, in a collaborative way, so that we can share the work that you all already do with much more diverse audiences from around the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. I love how you're exploring different formats and different platforms to expand beyond academia and even beyond the museum out to citizens and public. Last, we have Cynthia Breazeal, Professor of Media Arts and Sciences at the Media Lab, MIT Dean for Digital Learning, and Director of MIT's RAISE initiative.
Great, thank you. So I was asked to speak on the topic of digital learning. And when we think about the digital sphere, I can't think of a more impactful technology now than artificial intelligence. So in my presentation, I want to explore with you the intersection of AI and design and two different perspectives of how this can transform learning. So to start, I want to focus on the work I've done as a professor in the Media Lab. I direct the Personal Robots group. We're really a pioneer of the field of social robotics and human-robot interaction. And you can imagine from an academic perspective, the sphere of AI and the sphere of design have, for a long time been pretty separate. But of course, as now AI has started to infuse many of our digital, apps and services and experiences, they've been slowly kind of merging and encroaching on each other. So I just wanted to take a moment to say, what does that process look in a lab like mine? Because I think when we say the word design, it can mean a lot of different things, and we've heard many different perspectives of what that process is. So within my own group, design has many interlocking and many layers of interaction between design, understanding human behavior, and technology. So of course, if we're designing social robots that can interact with people, there's an important aspect of it, which is this human experience design. So you can imagine we apply a lot of just classic human-centered design techniques to support that. We also really need to understand how people are interacting with these technologies. These are new technologies, how they're being impacted by these technologies. We can apply design methods to understand human behavior, but we often apply a lot of scientific methods as well, such as randomized controlled trials. We analyze and assess human behavior with our systems through self-report data, behavioral data, through many different modalities, vision, speech, all kinds of things, to really try to get a much deeper understanding of what is the influence of these technologies on human behavior. And both of these very human-centered perspectives really inform what's the algorithmic design that we do as well. So we're also trying to advance computational science. So this has been at the core of my group for a number of years. But as time has gone on, we've been adding layers to this. So what happens when AI starts to become a design partner in this experience, right? We're hearing more and more about generative AI techniques. In the case of our learning work, personalization is a critical part of how our systems learn from interaction, from experience, how to tune their behavior, how to tune the experience for the learner, to be, enhance engagement, to enhance learning outcomes. So AI is entering into this loop in this kind of continuous way, which is interesting. And then, as we are engaging communities, real-world applications, of course, thinking through the stakeholders that we've heard many talks about how critical this is. So inviting students, teachers, parents into this design process as co-designers of these technologies is also really important to consider. So all of these things in this reciprocal process, particularly when we send these robots, all over the country for extended periods of time, how we understand the longitudinal impact of these systems is also of great importance and interest to us. So that's what our internal design process looks like. I want to highlight an example of how we've been applying this to transform learning, where we've actually been working in the area of early childhood learning for many years now. And the punchline is, when we started to develop social robots as learning companions, of course we found that children were particularly attracted to this kind of technology. We know that in the United States we don't have a high-quality national preschool program. As a result, we know there are quite significant disparities in the quality of kindergarten readiness, particularly across social economic classes when children enter kindergarten ready to learn. There are numerous studies basically saying that the most effective, most cost-effective, most impactful time to intervene is early childhood. So we really started focusing on young children as a key stakeholder. And when you think about how young children learn, they're not going to learn through reading because they don't know how to read yet. They're not going to learn by typing at a computer like their older peers. They learn through social interaction and play. So if we're a social robotics lab, this became a really kind of high-impact, provocative application of social robots to support how children learn. So we started to develop these robots that engage children as a playful playmate practice partner. Teachers also liked this because they understood the very different roles that they played, and they didn't feel the robot was competing against them as perhaps an expert tutor system might, right? So we got a lot of the teacher buy-in around this as well. So now we're or finishing up a pandemic, hopefully. We're still in the pandemic. And I would say what started as kind of a critical period of early childhood learning has now reached almost catastrophic conditions, right? So we now know that so many children have just lost months, if not over a year's worth of learning gains that they would have had if they were not in a pandemic. Couple this with the challenge of a lot of teachers have left the profession during the pandemic. So right when children need more support, we have a smaller workforce. And also we know that there's no way children are going to be able to catch up if we just limit them to classroom time learning. So we need a scalable, accessible, effective way to give children more support in learning beyond the classroom time that's affordable, I think, to really bridge this gap. So this is where, again, AI could become an interesting part of the solution of this really critical area of education. So I want to just show you a short video of what this experience looks like. Again, we didn't try to emulate a robot as an adult tutor. We really were inspired by peer-to-peer learning. And peer-to-peer learning is actually really powerful, right? When you learn with friends, with playmates, there are times when you may know something more than your friend and you can teach them. There's sometimes that you might not know something like your friend and they can teach you. And there's sometimes you just explore together. So it's a very rich learning context. So we've been designing robots and a whole series, a whole suite of educational games. These are language and literacy games that children play with the robot, taking turns. And this particular game I'm going to show you is a game called Word Quest. It's inspired by the game of I Spy. So there's scenes, they're given a challenge word. In the case of this video, the challenge word is lavender. And the little girl and the robot take turns in trying to find objects in the scene that match this challenge word. So this is a vocabulary learning game. So I'll start playing the video. So first it's the child's turn. And I really want you to pay attention to just the quality of interaction, right? This is quite different from how children interact with other kinds of technologies in their lives. So the child and the robot, they're talking with each other. The robot is fully autonomous. The child makes a choice. She's like, I'm familiar with this word lavender, but I don't quite remember what it is. She makes a choice. Turns out it's not right. The robot, though, says something encouraging. It says, you'll do better next time. I believe in you.
Robot's turn.
And now it's the robot's turn, but the robot leans towards her, and you can see like she's right back in the interaction. So now the robot's taking the turn, but like you look at the kind of interpersonal, social, effective, supportive interaction that this child's experiencing with this robot learning companion. Now, under the hood, the robot is capturing what she's doing on the tablet, what she's saying, her facial expressions, and personalizing to her the entire time. So when the robot makes a selection, she actually says back to the robot, I believe in you, right? And this is provocative because when you learn with peers, you learn all kinds of things. That's not just knowledge and skills. It's how to be, how to have a growth mindset, how to be empathetic, right? And so it's intriguing that we're seeing evidence that children are picking up these kinds of aspirational behaviors as well. So, okay, so I can't resist, I have to show some data, right? So the punchline is, there's real promise to this approach. So we can show in randomized controlled trials and longitudinal studies in classrooms, children seem to learn better, in this case a vocabulary measure, from the personalized system versus a non-personalized version of the robot that just follows a fixed curriculum versus a baseline where there's no robot intervention, no additional practice and support, it's just classroom learning. Interestingly, we know from just human psychology literature, the closer the relationship a student has with their teacher or friend, often that's correlated with higher learning outcomes. We're starting to see the same measure with children with their report of closeness of relationship to the robot. So children who rate having a closer relationship to the robot have higher vocabulary scores. When they do a story retell task, they tell longer, more elaborate stories. They embed more of the target vocabulary. And interestingly, when we look at the personalization condition, these effects are even stronger. So the first time we're starting to see this relationship between personalization, engagement, and learning. So it's interesting. So, I feel like this is an example where we're moving beyond kind of human technology interaction design to longer-term relationship, right? So the robot is interesting, and that is not trying to emulate or replicate any existing relationship a child has. It's not exactly like a pet. It's not exactly like a friend. It's not exactly like a teacher. It has attributes of these different kinds of relationships. So there's attributes of the robot that interacts with the child as a motivating, supportive ally. There's aspects that it's a cool, connected tool. It can capture data, do all this analysis, personalize. But there's also this property of being this attentive, non-judgmental companion. You can imagine in a learning situation, that's actually really powerful because you learn when you actually make mistakes, and the robot can actually model when it makes mistakes that's okay, that's how you learn, that's growth mindset, right? So you can emulate a lot of kinds of mirror and emulate a lot of kinds of aspirational kind of behaviors that will help the child learn positive attitudes, positive perceptions in the bigger picture. Now, I hope as I'm describing this potential wonderful thing, you're also thinking, wait a minute. There could also be a much darker side of this. And I think the field of AI is starting to become much more aware that as you create emotionally engaging, persuasive kinds of technologies, this is something we really have to pay attention to. So there are algorithmic ways you can kind of get at this, things like explainable AI, trustworthy AI. There are AI literacy aspects of that. How do you educate people about these systems so they can be informed users of these technologies? There are design frameworks we can adapt. We're starting to look at social design justice methods to be able to expand this. And then even beyond these things, perhaps we can think about how can we empower young people to actually be responsible AI designers of these systems as well. So I want to pivot now and talk about work we're doing within RAISE, which is really the mission is how do we nurture and prepare the next generation of far more diverse, responsible AI-powered change makers who all aspire to make a better world for all. So this is a program that's run by MIT RAISE. It's an online program so that we can have participants from all over the country. It accepts students from middle school to high school and college, so we have cross-grade band teams. And it's a 6-week online program where kids learn not only about AI, but how to responsibly design, and then it also adds an entrepreneurial pitch competition at the end. So I like to think about it, it's beyond project-based learning to what is impact-driven learning? How can we motivate and drive students' interest in learning about AI because they want to have a positive impact in the world? So The program has a number of innovative elements. One is that we have a computational action curriculum by which we basically teach kids about human-centered design. We teach them, of course, technology tracks about, we have a deep learning track, we have a mobile app and AI track. We teach them about kind of responsible design frameworks. We teach them about how to, iterate on your design and think through both the positive and potentially negative implications of what you're designing, and wrapping it around this kind of entrepreneurial mindset. So they learn project management, they learn design thinking, they learn technology, and they really apply it all together in this program. To empower them to work with AI, we're also developing innovative tools. So in this case, we've been incorporating advanced AI techniques into platforms like App Inventor, so even novice coders can build working mobile apps that use AI technologies. For more skilled coders, we teach them kind of industry tools that they can learn to train their own deep learning models. So they're learning real technical skills as well. And just to appreciate that when they can deploy these artifacts on things like smartphones or smart speakers or Chrome browsers, they have the ability to actually put their artifacts out in the world, can affect a lot of people at scale. So the impact they can have is compelling, and it's really important that we train them, teach them, kind of give them a broader sense of awareness of how you do that responsibly. So I just want to highlight a couple of projects that we see come out of this program. As I mentioned, the last part of the program is a create-a-thon. Students form teams, they're assigned a mentor, and they choose a problem that they care about to help their community, and they do an entrepreneurial design competition where they come up with a working application. So these are the kinds of working models that students come up with. One team had a couple of students from California. They used climate data to train a machine learning model to be able to predict wildfires. We had another team that was very concerned about mental wellness of their peers. They developed a mobile app to foster conversations between parents and children around mental wellness. We had another team who looked at a diagnostic using effective computing around facial asymmetry to diagnose the potential of stroke. So we are always blown away by the kinds of projects and creativity that these students come up with. So just to conclude, I want to just, again, highlight, I think there's a lot of potential for how we innovate and how we learn with artificial intelligence to create a more equitable future. I think there's a lot of potential in how we have children and others learn about AI to help them innovate a better world. And I think in the big picture, when you think about the intersection of AI, design, and learning, it's really about empowering people to become who they aspire to be. So thank you.
Thank you. Can we pull up the slide of the faces? We've been told to sit under the faces. There we go. So we're going to have a discussion, open it up to questions. I wanted to kick it off just using this opportunity with the Academy to kind of dream a little bit. Maybe one place where the Academy could change the future is rethinking, what is the future of design education? Is it the studio model? Is that the best? We know that that's effective, and there's really amazing examples of that. Is it getting out into the world? Is it the museum and exhibition? Just posing that question of anyone that wants to take it, what is your dream for the future? Is there another perspective on the future of design education?
I might start taking that on, since I think I'm sort of a little bit different from my colleagues here in that part of what we're trying to do at the Cooper Hewitt, and I know what museums try to do in general, is to expose audiences at an early age, but also adults and later learners, and so we go from K-12 to the whole spectrum of the ages, to make sure that we expose our audiences to the concept of design, almost in a way that enables them to see design as a possibility in their future. And that's almost a pipeline for then what you all are doing. We have a huge challenge in diversifying the profession in that way, and then making sure that we diversify our programs enough so that our audiences can see that as a possibility. So I think the challenge is in showing that design is a great equalizer to find that point of entry that then can lead to a career in design if you would like to, or maybe not, or maybe just to being a very informed citizen that then just, make sure that you understand the environment that you live in so much better. So I think it's a combination of both. It's not just one model or the other. I think it's starting with exposure and then sort of like leading up to deeper levels for those who want to pursue that.
I'll add to that. I mean, I think my microphone is not on. Somebody turn it on? Or
They swapped your battery, but maybe the battery.
maybe that was the stealth move. Yeah. Okay.
They cut you off.
Yes, right. Silenced. I would like to see a little more of the seminar in the studio and a little more of the studio in the seminar. So I've taught at liberal arts colleges, design studios there, and it was so clear that what was lacking was the kind of deep agency that my students at Olin feel, right? They feel a deep permission and capacity to roll their sleeves up and to try things, and they're unafraid of prototyping. That is a kind of power, and I think that agency to see that the way things are is not the way things must be, and indeed that they can intervene is quite powerful. On the other hand, in my studio environment, certainly in engineering, I don't see the kind of criticality and deep attention to histories, dynamics, anthropology, economics that I do see among liberal arts students who are trained to closely analyze texts and to really attend to the nuances. So I'd like a little of those mindset models to do a little more weaving and mixing.
Yeah, and I would say that an academic semester is not the ideal vehicle for solving important design challenges. And so I think something like the Academy has the opportunity to create these longitudinal connections so that a problem can be moved between classes over time through it with still design, but designing different aspects of it with different types of engagement with the people who are experiencing the challenge, looking at different facets of that. And I think that if you have a centralized sort of design academy, it can help to curate problems through a much more significant time frame and types of interaction than a single semester course, or even a 2-semester course can do on its own.
Should we go to questions from the audience? Yeah, Nicholas?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you so much. I'm going to drill down on one specific part of Skylar's question, which I think is particularly appropriate to ask today, which is how can design education better scale? How can we apply all the different things that you've shared with us about how design education works to increase its reach? John, in his introduction to President Reif, said, rightly honored him for how much MIT has done to scale its own education across the world. But as we think of scaling design education beyond small labs, even to all 4,000 undergraduates at MIT and beyond the 4,000 undergraduates of MIT to millions and billions of people around the world, can we do it through infinitely repeating small studios? Or how do we really need to think big in order to increase the impact of the kinds of thinking you all showed us today?
So I'll take that. So I think what struck me through a lot of these talks is there is common threads that we all share in terms of like core attributes or ingredients. I think when you talk about scale, people think about online learning, digital learning, but I think there's an area for innovation, both in the technology as well as in the pedagogy for how do you bring that power of face-to-face in-person studio style innovation online, and how does that scale? Because I think that's one of the low-hanging fruits potentially if you can crack that nut. But that I think is the opportunity that the Design Academy can have.
Well, and if we think about the pandemic, in a way, that was a massive experiment, massive global experiment. How do you teach design? Maybe not the best of circumstances. There was lots of challenges, but that did give us one global experiment of how to do that. I think we're going to go to an online question.
Yep. So this question is for the panelists who work in the university space. When you're starting a novel interdisciplinary program, there's a comment that faculty in pre-existing disciplines might be slower to adopt and engage with that new program. So how do you accelerate faculty engagement and buy-in?
Saeed?
A relational model of change.
Or Saeed, do you want to talk about, engaging schools and design for educators and that perspective?
I mean, that they asked about the university level, but I can, I think that answers the question before around the scalability. I think this is what we've been obsessing with the last few years, that how do you take that experience, very intense studio experience where you have coaches and the labs and all of that, and you're working closely with the kids and they have access to everything that they need, and try to expand that to a lot of places that don't have a lot of these tools. And we found a lot of success doing it just on the fly. We can just do it, and it sometimes works and it sometimes does not work, but we're starting to realize more and more that we need to build tools, we need to build more scaffolding. When we give out like curriculum or studios, it has to be guided in a particular way, and we cannot just assume that it will work. But the amazing part is that it actually works. I know a lot of people struggle to kind of replicate some of these experiences in other places, but sometimes we are applying it in a district in San Diego, and a lot of the teachers are doing amazing. I mean, everybody loves it, the student loves it. So there are ways that these experiences can be expanded in a really effective way.
And if I could add, I think student ambassadors is a great way. I think a lot of times, in our experience, students were our best form of engaging other faculty members, was because they appreciated the experiences that they had and they commented on it, and it became an example that other people could choose to follow. And I think if you were trying to start a new program, trying to find a way to get the students to be interested and engaged, and then do outreach, I think is really important. And if the students aren't interested and engaged, then maybe you have to reassess your university program.
I was going to add to that that we run a master's with Parsons School of Design at the Cooper Hewitt on the history of design. They are housed in our building on our 6th floor. We are close neighbors and collaborators. We work constantly with our faculty and with their students, and they use our collection. And that level of engagement is what makes that program in particular so special, is the ability to come in contact with design history, with objects, and to understand the actuality and the physicality of design through having access to the national collection that's literally in the floors beneath them, right? So there's an element there of coming in contact with the collection as well that has been crucial for that level of engagement as well.
Another question? Yeah.
Thank you. In my experience, realizing the potential of design as education involves a lot of unlearning as well as learning. And I wonder, especially maybe for you, Saeed, thinking of the middle school and high school context, I wonder if you could speak to that notion of what has to be unlearned and how you approach unwinding some of the assumptions that might prevent students from really having these transformative experiences.
That's an amazing question. Yeah, a lot of these learning habits and walls that students build in a traditional environment, they almost need to be taken apart. Like a simple example, as like when the kids come to us and we give them a challenge to do, they think that the faster you are, the better you are. Because if you take a math homework, obviously the faster you do it, then that's. And for us, that is, the faster road is not really the best road. Like, that is just a very, very basic way to kind of change how they think. The other piece around, feedback, they produce something, and because we've never given feedback to students in the way that we want to give them, they look at this, and it's like, this is the best thing that I've ever made, and you tell them, no, it's not really quite good enough. And there's a lot of, they go through a process of like, oh, but why, and stuff, but they ultimately go back and produce something, and then you give them more feedback, and they do something better. And then once they internalize this, what we see with our kids is that they start seeking other people and ask for that feedback. And that process does not take one day, it takes a year. And so when people talk about design, we keep talking about this, it's not a recipe, like you don't just follow it, it's a mindset. And so how do you shift the mindset of these students to be done in a designerly way? And it's some kids get it in a month, and some get it in 2 years. But it happens. These walls can be fallen down, and people can turn. They can be, because it starts impacting them like really deeply. So it's even if they are having issues in previous schools and stuff because their voices were not heard, and suddenly these walls are taken apart, and now they have a voice. And we have, I mean, I could have showed a million stories of kids who really transformed, and they transformed their families with them too because they started thinking in a very different way.
And the MIT version that I'm always encountering is the P set. You know, most of our students are just so familiar with the problem set model of like right and wrong answer, and there's an optimal, and there's and that's great in certain contexts, but in the design studio environment, that's not exactly how it goes. And we need to talk about concepts and development, and iteration, and it's different. Maybe one last question, and then we'll break. Do we have another one online or no? Okay. Then maybe we end it here, and I'm told there's a 30-minute coffee break around the corner, same spot as lunch. Thank you so much.